Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Finance Committee meeting. I will now call this meeting to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. We welcome a number of people in the boardroom for our public meeting. In accordance with our policies and procedures, we expect a safe and respectful environment for all participants. That includes staff, board members, and guests. Everyone is expected to be respectful and not interrupt the meeting proceedings. In the interest of maintaining that, should there be any conflict, we don't expect any, between members of the audience or any meeting disruptions, people in attendance may be directed to leave the premises. Like I said, we do not expect that to occur. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we have an agenda in front of us, and I need a motion to approve that agenda. Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. All those in favor? Thank you. We also have the minutes from our April 15th, 2025 Education Finance minutes in front of us. I need a motion to approve those minutes. Thank you, Trustee Miller. I wanted to say Brown, but no, Miller. I'm sorry, Tracy is not here. She's virtual. Tracy is here. All those in favor? Thank you. We have a public deputation, and we are very pleased. We will now be moving to that public deputation. In accordance with the terms of the bylaws, the Durham District School Board welcomes presentations by individuals and by groups. Tonight, we have one presentation. Should a presentation approach the time limit of 5 minutes, the presenter will be notified and will be requested to conclude the presentation to provide sufficient time for questions from committee members. Presenters are reminded that the focus of their presentation should reflect their submitted materials. So I would like to welcome Christine Brown, representing the Canadian Union of Public Employees, to join us, and I welcome your friends who have come with you. Once you've finished your presentation, Christine, trustees will be asking questions of clarification, and please go ahead as soon as you're comfortable to begin.
Good evening, and through you, Chair Morton. I previously spoke at the Education Finance Committee meeting in April regarding the Durham District School Board's decision to unilaterally close the Care for Newcomer Children programs in Pickering and Oshawa. I return tonight with deep concern as this decision continues to have far-reaching implications for the families and communities we serve. By eliminating these programs, the board is effectively removing a cornerstone of support that enables newcomer parents to access education, find employment, and integrate into the community. This decision was made without proper consultation with affected family or frontline staff who deliver these essential services. It disregards the core values and principles of equity, inclusion, and accountability, principles the board has committed to uphold in their multi-year strategic directions. Families who have already faced immense challenges in their journey to Canada are now being asked to bear even more hardship with little explanation and no clear plan for support. I would like to highlight that the federal government has committed to ongoing...
Excuse me, Christine. Do you mind if we take a short recess? there's something going on with our sound system, and I think we need to rectify that. So if you don't mind, and then we'll go back to the beginning. Thank you.
So start again.
Yeah.
Good evening, and through you, Chair Morton. I previously spoke at the Education Finance Committee meeting in April regarding the Durham District School Board's decision to unilaterally close the Care for Newcomer Children program in Pickering and Oshawa. I return tonight with deep concern as this decision continues to have far-reaching implications for the families and communities we serve. By eliminating these programs, the board is effectively removing a cornerstone of support that enables newcomer parents to access education, find employment, and integrate into the community. This decision was made without proper consultation with affected families or frontline staff who deliver these essential services. It disregards the core values and principles of equity, inclusion, and accountability, principles the board has committed to uphold in their multi-year strategic directions. Families who have already faced immense challenges in their journey to Canada are now being asked to bear even more hardship with little explanation or no clear plan for support. I would like to highlight that the federal government has committed to ongoing funding for the CNC assessment and support programs, as well as the annual conference scheduled for this November. Many CNC programs operated by school boards within and around the GTA will continue to receive support. This continued investment clearly demonstrates the federal government's recognition of the CNC program's vital role in supporting and integrating newcomer families. This is not a system in decline. It is a system being supported, expanded, and celebrated. Why then is our board moving in the opposite direction? With relevance to the cost analysis provided in your package tonight, the existing funding, federal funding, is sufficient to sustain the CNC program, especially when factoring in the possible early redeployment options already offered by the board, as well as an early retirement of one of our staff members. These internal adjustments would significantly reduce operational costs and demonstrate that the program is not only essential, but financially viable. It is particularly important to note that when the CNC closure was first announced, the board stated that they had carefully considered where cuts could be made. However, while eliminating a proven and vital program, they are simultaneously implementing new initiatives. This seems counterintuitive and raises serious concern about the board's decision-making process or priorities. Last June, it was communicated that the federal government provides, on average, $2.1 million in direct funding to the Durham District School Board for its linked programs. However, this year's reported funding grant is just over $2.8 million. Even with the reported $250,000 decrease from the previous year, this still reflects a significantly higher amount that was originally cited in the 2024-2025 budget. This argument is further supported by information available through the federal government's public portal grant portal, which shows that amendments to the previous 5-year funding agreement had consistently increased in the agreement's value. There is no public record of reductions or shortfalls. This raises a critical question: why then were we told that the funding shortfall necessitated the elimination of the 5 CNC positions last June? The financial data simply does not align with the explanation that funding constraints led to these cuts. This lack of transparency is deeply concerning, especially given the impact on staff, newcomer families, and the broader community. I urge the board to reconsider this decision and engage in transparent and collaborative consultation process. Our communities deserve better, our newcomers deserve better, and our children above all deserve the support and care that sets them up for lifelong success. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. We will now open it up for questions or comments from trustees. Trustees, and we do have two trustees who are joining us on board. We see Emma Cunningham and we see Tracy Brown. So all trustees, do we have comments or questions? We will go to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering, you know, we were provided with your cost analysis and so forth. I'm just wondering where you got, you don't really mention where you got the data from, and I'm just wondering where you did get it. What is the source? Thank you.
When we had the staffing reductions last June, the union was provided with a cost calculation provided by the Durham District School Board, and this is a direct replica of the funding model that they provided us with. So the information was used to do the same thing for what this fiscal year would be like.
Supplemental? Are there other questions? At the present time, I'm seeing none. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and sorry, I just appreciate that. All right. And, you know, understand fully, you know, the supports that are given to our newcomers and so forth, and this is the appropriate time to bring this information forward, and we'll take it into consideration when we're looking at the budget when it's brought forward at this point in time. Okay, thank you. And thank you for the efforts that you put forward to bring this to our attention.
Seeing no further hands up, I thank you for being here. I thank you for your presentation and giving this the thought that you have. Thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, our summary of changes for the 25-26 funding model, and I'm going to ask Associate Director Wright to come forward with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. Just going to try and share my screen. There we go. Thank you very much. Really pleased to be here this evening to provide you with a presentation on changes to the funding model and the impact those changes will have on our revenue for next year. This topic hasn't specifically been included in our regular Education Finance Committee meeting cadence, but in support of growing capacity and to support continuity of the conversation around budget that we've been having over the course of the past year, we're focusing this meeting on our revenue stream. As we go through this meeting and the next, we'd be happy to receive feedback on things that you think we should be considering as we move through this process. I promise as we go through this, I am not trying to bamboozle. I do use ministry terminology throughout the presentation, particularly when describing the funding model change, because I'm using their lingo off their documentation, including it in the presentation. If the information is inaccessible, please let me know. I'll do my best to explain in plain language. I've tried to take out the acronyms that are so prevalent in our sector. I'm sure I've missed a few dozen, but really happy to be interrupted to be asked questions throughout the presentation. This is a slide that was included in our November professional development session on the budget, and I don't think we could talk about revenue in the school board context without talking about enrollment, as it is the single biggest driver of funding for school boards. We circulated a draft copy of the official enrollment projection report last week for your information, and you'll note in that report we reference headcount. So these are the three different ways that we note enrollment within our sector. The official enrollment projection notes headcount because space planning is important for the purpose for the purpose of that report. The enrollment projections that we will be using for this report and to build the budget will be full-time equivalent numbers. Headcount will always be the higher number, but it is very often close to what we see as the full-time equivalent number for elementary students, as the great majority of elementary students are full-time students. The full-time equivalent status most directly impacts secondary school enrollment because not all secondary students take a full course load. So there are two official count dates the ministry requires us to report on, October 31st and March 30th. The count date enrollment is full-time equivalent, which reflects the percentage of day students attend. So again, this is primarily a secondary concept. So if an elementary student goes to school all day, their head count is the same as their FTE. It is 1. If a secondary student takes 2 out of 4 courses in a semester, their FTE is 0.5. Their head count is 1. When it comes to, and I misspoke earlier, we're actually funded on average daily enrollment, which is the third way we calculate enrollment. And average daily enrollment is an average of the October 31st and March 30th count date. So we submit a budget to the Ministry of Education. We're building a budget now based on projected October 31st numbers. We are going to update those numbers to actual at October 31st and submit them to the ministry, and we'll build a revised budget based on those numbers. And then at the end of the school year in August, we'll report on our average daily enrollment, and our funding will be adjusted to reflect what the actual average daily enrollment was for the previous year. The year-over-year increase in enrollment for funding that we are using for our estimates is 1,167 pupils. If you have had a chance to take a look at the official enrollment projection report, you'll see that the head count has increased by 1,370 70 students, and that's what I mean. Head count will always be the higher number versus full-time equivalent. Just a note also that in the head count numbers included in the official enrollment projection report, our average DAS enrollment, our Durham Alternative Secondary School enrollment of 450 students, is not included because it fluctuates significantly throughout the school year, but it's important we include it for budget purposes because we do staff based on the full 450 students to ensure continuity of teaching staff over the course of the year. I acknowledge that we missed the mark with our enrollment projections last year. We spent a good amount of time digging into why that was, and we have recalibrated this year, spent a significant amount of time vetting the numbers and ensuring we felt good about the projections we have in place for next year. On to the funding model. The Government of Ontario, through the Ministry of Education, provides the significant amount of funding for school boards. The funding comes through the Core Education Funding Model, which was a new funding model for the 2024-2025 school year. This slide highlights the 6 funds included in the Core Education Funding Model, and we'll go through the more significant funding model changes that we are seeing this year and the impact these they have on the individual funds, and give you a sense of the dollar impact we anticipate seeing year over year. The system is in constant flux in terms of the number of students that we have coming and going, in terms of the funding model changes, including our internal staffing and operational changes, and we do our best to smooth the impact of changes over time. Being a growth enrollment board, we have had the benefit of not having to address many significant funding reductions. However, when the funding model changes, we do need to adjust the services that we provide in order to maintain balance. So the Classroom Staffing Fund, the first of the 6. When we look at these slides, I'd like you to take a look at the 2024-2025 revised estimate column and compare it to the draft 2025-2026 budget column. So these are the budgets based on the grants that were released about a week and a half ago with our updated enrollment, and you'll see they lead to a variance on the right-hand column. A significant amount of change is being driven in the year-over-year funding by our enrollment growth, that 1,167 pupils, and benchmark changes. Benchmark changes are changes to amounts that the ministry uses to provide consistent fund to the sector. In this case, the biggest driver is the salary benchmark, given the recently negotiated collective agreements. The benchmark changes related to salary increases are driving about 11 million out of the 18 million. So on the top line on the far right column, the variance column that I'm going to speak to, just the high level numbers, the smaller numbers I won't get into detail in, but we'll be happy to answer questions if anybody has any. The benchmark changes related to salary increases are driving about 11 million of that 18 million, and enrollment growth is driving the balance of the $7 million. The language classroom staffing allocation is seeing a significant reduction from the ESL portion of the grant, for the English as a second language portion of the grant. For English as a second language, we receive funding on a 4-year sliding scale for students attending schools in the district who are arriving from non-English speaking countries. So in the first year a student lands, we receive a portion of funding to support the language needs of that student. In the second year they've landed, we receive slightly less funding, and so on for the third and fourth year. And after the fourth year, we receive no specific language funding to support that student. So the $4 million, or the $3.4 million you're seeing year-over-year reduction is a reflection of the number of students who qualify for that ESL funding dropping off that fourth year. And due to the reduction in federal immigration numbers, we don't expect to see that climbing at the same rate that we have over the last few years. The local circumstances allocation is largely driven by teacher qualification and experience. About 16 of the $20 million in that third line is represented by Q&E. So teacher staffing is flowed based on an average benchmark amount. So an average staffing amount for teachers, but the teaching salary grid is very broad. And so this is a funding mechanism to top up from the average teacher salary, from the average teaching benchmark that we're funded, to the actual teacher salary. It's called the qualification and experience component, and it's fairly intuitive when you know that a long-serving teacher at A4 Max, for example, the highest spot on the grid, will have qualification experience that put them at that spot on the grid, and so the ministry makes up the difference between the benchmark funding and their actual cost through the Q&E portion. This is a bit of a funny grant. It fluctuates significantly and really does reflect the staff mix that we have throughout the year. If we have a significant number of new hires in a year, the qualification experience grant will be lower than what we would have experienced if we had a significant roster of experienced teachers. In terms of funding model changes, the ministry is continuing to roll out census data, updated census data, update in air quotes because it's now 2021 data, but certainly better than 2006 data. So this is the second year of a 5-year phase-in of updates to reflect the 2021 StatsCan census data. There's a minor increase to revenue, about $400,000, based on the rollout of that updated data. There's also a change based on differentiated funding for online learning. So the ministry has different average staffing benchmarks for in-person learning versus online learning. And the ministry funds us differently based on that benchmark. The ministry funds an average of 7.5 credits per secondary student, but breaks up that 7.5 credits into what they see as the online, so the average online learning portion and the in-person learning. So this year, unexpectedly, the ministry has reduced the online learning component, increased the in-person learning, which is actually giving school boards back a little bit more funding for staffing because the average staffing is higher, so the average class size is lower, average staffing is higher for in-person classes at 22 versus online learning of 35. So that's making about a $700,000 difference next year. On to the Learning Resources Fund. The per pupil allocation increase is largely being driven by benchmark and enrollment increases, and that really is the story of this grant allocation year over year. The majority of the differences in funding we're seeing are driven by our enrollment growth and the changes to the benchmarks, largely salary-related benchmarks based on centrally agreed collective agreements. The language supports and local circumstances allocation, again, is being driven by the qualification and experience component of the staff members that are included in this. And the school management allocation is being driven by benchmark salary increases. In terms of funding model changes, there are updates to funding for principals and vice principals included in the Learning Resource Fund, but it is really a reallocation. There is a component that is moving out of the supports for students component to a new principal and vice principal school management allocation component just for transparency, but doesn't impact the funding amount. And again, there are some impacts from the rollout of the census data in the Learning Resource Fund as well, but relatively insignificant. The Special Education Fund, again, top line on the right-hand side, the per pupil allocation. This increase is, again, largely being driven by salary benchmark increases and our enrollment increases. The differentiated needs allocation is a complex allocation within the Special Education Fund. It is made up of a number of different allocations. Of note of significance this year, the measure of variability and the statistical prediction model, which are both table amounts, are seeing the significant increases. Because they're table amounts and not calculated amounts, we don't actually know what numbers go in there to drive the increases, but based on the information the ministry has provided, we believe it is a combination of implementation of the updated census information, as well as enrollment and benchmark funding updates. The complex supports allocation includes the change to the ECPP and CTEP funding model. So the ECPP, Education Community Partnership Program, is being changed and split into two programs. The ECPP program, which will focus more on youth justice initiatives, and the CTEP, or the Care and Treatment Education programs, that will focus more on health-related or students that have a primary need for care and treatment versus education. The funding isn't changing significantly for the former ECPP or the new ECPP, CTEP funding models. They're just being split, with the exception of a per pupil amount being rolled out this year under the Care and Treatment or CTEP program. So the per pupil amount makes up the bulk of the $644,000 increase you're seeing in that complex supports allocation. There is little to no information at this point from the Ministry of Education around expectations for using those funds, and so we will put those in a hold, understanding that special education funding is enveloped and can be only used for the purposes as which it's intended, and we'll look for more information from the Ministry to understand how we can support students best through that funding. The special incidents portion, funding that we receive for students with exceptional needs that require more than 2 full-time equivalent staff to support. The funding model is changing based on an interim formula as the ministry continues to work to a new approach. So this has historically been an application-based funding model. For this year, we are receiving an interim base amount that is the same as the amount we received last year, plus a small exceptional circumstances amount to deal with new cases this year. Also, we are continuing the census rollout, or are continuing to see the impacts of the census rollout, this being year 2 of 5. In the School Facilities Fund, benchmark increases in the School Facilities Fund are both in relation to staffing and relation to the non-staffing portion of operation costs. So the ministry has fairly routinely provided a 2% increase to benchmark non-staffing costs to cover things like the increase in cost of utilities. It doesn't necessarily reflect the CPI or inflationary increase we see every year. That is just the ministry's, generally their standard funding amount. So the School Facilities Fund sees the biggest impact of the benchmark increase to that non-staffing component, and that $3.3 million. About $2 million of the $1.3 is made up of that 2% benchmark increase for non-staffing. The rest is driven by enrollment growth. There is a small change in the funding model to the school operations or school facilities fund in school operations, but it is a terminology split and does not involve change in revenue. The Student Transportation Fund, I think the ministry does hear the sector sometimes when they talk about underfunding and the impact on students. The ministry, for the second year in a row, has ensured that every school board has received at least a 2.5% increase over the prior year's grant. When you look at the numbers, these are high-level numbers, so the transportation service allocation is actually a net amount that's made up of a significant number of funding amounts. To get us to a 2.5% year-over-year increase, we're actually receiving about $2.4 million through that top-up amount. The funding to cover costs associated with the non-refundable portion of HST is about $500,000. So those two amounts are providing an extra $2.9 million to our transportation allocation. We are netting out at an increase of $645,000, which is about 2.5% of last year's grant. So there have been a significant number of changes within the transportation allocation based on the reporting that we have through DSTS provided to the Ministry of Education, largely around routing. For consistency, the ministry uses common metrics as drivers for funding. So there are a number of drivers for school board administrative funding. T4s is one of those drivers. So the number of T4s that a school board issues drives benchmark funding, so the benchmark number of staff and the benchmark salary for staffing in human resources, payroll, other corporate functions. The staffing allocation the number of T4s we issued for 2024, 2025 was significantly inflated because of the charter challenge that was decided and finalized through Bill 124. So the Ministry of Education received a charter challenge for an unconstitutional wage freeze across the sector between 2018 and 2023, I believe. The charter challenge resulted in the Ministry of Education paying retroactively to everybody that was impacted by that unconstitutional freeze, which means we issued a significant number of T4s to individuals we wouldn't normally in the course of a year. So a lot of retired folks received retroactive payments and received T4s. So we're seeing this year an artificial increase in the funding allocation for these positions. The ministry has confirmed that we are not to expect this increase in coming years. It is a 1 year only. So that's driving about a $2 million increase for us for next year. The notable change to the School Board Administration Fund, this is the one fund that's sort of a reverse envelope. You can't spend more on school board administration than you receive in funding, although there was the ability to allocate interest revenue, lease revenue, et cetera, to your school board administration fund to cover costs in excess of what the ministry funds you. But the hard limit from a ministry perspective was the funding, no more than the funding you receive for school administration out of their grant funding could be used on school board administration. So that expense limit has changed for next year. It's there on the screen. $2.2 million plus 3.44% of the school board's total operating expenses. From what we have seen so far, that increase is well in excess of what we spend on school board administration in a year. I'll move fairly quickly through the responsive education program grants. Just a reminder for members of the Education Finance Committee that REP grants are intended to be short-term funding streams that target specific ministry initiatives. So they are part of the overall ministry funding amount, but they are funded differently than core education funding, which is a stable, ongoing funding, ostensibly a stable ongoing funding amount. Responsive education program grants are time limited and targeted to specific ministry initiatives. You can see the variance there. Overall, pretty stable year over year. The ministry's priorities look to continue to be mental health of students through the RAP grants, reading, literacy, numeracy, and some equity-based programs. And we'll be distributing a copy of the presentation right after this. Apologies that you didn't have it in advance of the meeting, but with the late delay, distribution of the grants, we weren't prepared to distribute the presentation in advance. The most significant changes you'll see on this last slide here, Bill 124 remedy. So that is how we were funded. We were funded through an RAP grant, and that is the amount we distributed for the 124 remedy, that the charter challenge. And the labor-related adjustments were retroactive agreements that were centrally negotiated and were funded to school boards through a responsive education grant. I think we've spoken about most of these. We spoke about benchmark changes throughout. We spoke about qualification experience factors. We did not speak about temporary accommodation. The Ministry of Education has just about doubled temporary accommodation funding for the sector for next year, moving the grant from $40 million to $70 million for the province. The temporary accommodation grant is a little bit funny to calculate. The ministry has a defined pool of money. In previous years, it was $40 million. Next year, it will be $70 million. They provide boards a weighted average of that pot of money based on how much they actually spent on average over the previous 3 years. So last year, we received about $2.6 million in temporary accommodation funding. We spent about $11 million on temporary accommodation. Next year, we will receive about $9 million in temporary accommodation funding, and we're intending to spend significantly less than that, probably closer to the neighborhood of $3 million next year. And so it's not a grant that actually covers the cost, nor is it designed to actually cover the cost of temporary accommodation. The highlight here is that the grant is increasing for next year, and we're happy to take advantage of that. We talked about the change to ESL. We talked about the change to the number of T4s. So to wrap up the presentation this evening, the next time we meet, we'll be presenting a draft budget that reflects these revenue changes and the associated expense changes, as well as changes to expenses that have gone through come through our internal budget prioritization process. We are confident that when you see the draft budget, you will see the strategic plan reflected, because that is, as an organization, what we are working towards implementing. The timelines for putting this together have been tight, as you know. We are working to get the draft budget out to you by the end of the week in advance of the Education Finance Committee next Tuesday. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's after this meeting based on the revenues, if you have any questions, or in advance of the draft budget based on the funding model changes, or after you receive the draft budget at the end of the week, or have had a chance to review. If you have any questions, any comments, any issues that need clarification, would be really happy to walk through those with you. We have had a couple of successful conversations with trustees to provide clarification. This is not a straightforward thing. The education funding model is complex, big dollars, and we're really happy to help make sure you have the information you need to make the decision when it comes time to approve the budget. If you prefer, the chair, the vice chair of this committee, the Education Finance Committee, have also said they're happy to connect with you to help facilitate answers to questions, as well as Chair Tracy Brown. So with that, I am happy to take any questions through you, Madam Chair.
We can see that your last 11 days have been very busy, because it was only 11 days ago that you received the core funding announcement. So we thank you for your efforts, and we look forward to a week from now, or maybe later this week, receiving a copy of that draft budget. But for now, I think we will have questions, and we'll go to Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and you kind of highlighted some of the questions I had, and that some of the changes in the funding, in particular the English language classroom funding is really disappointing to see such a significant, but also in the responsive education program allocations, in that you're looking at decreases in basically around trades, which I thought was a positive, was supposed to be one of the promotions of this particular government at this point in time. And, you know, I do appreciate when it comes to also understanding you know, when we talk about the census, it makes a big difference when they do change it. But, you know, again, depending on the funding envelope, they use different census numbers as well. And I just kind of think is that, you know, in one case you're looking at 3/5 of the 2011 census and 2/5 of the 2021 when we're talking about the this is the distance allocation, a part of that is there. But yet in special education, we're still at 3/5 of the 2006 census data. So we're still, the majority of our funding is coming from the the data generated is from 2006, and only 2/5 come from the 2021 data. And that, you know, and we know that they've done it over a 5-year. Meanwhile, you know, Durham continues to grow, and there'll be another census before we even realize the impact of the funding that is generated from that census data. So it's still very bothersome to me that this is what, you know, again, special education, why not? Why are we still using 2006 census data? And I know it's just a small portion of the 2 prediction models, but it means a lot because there's a huge change in the demographics in Durham. And I know you know that, but I just have to sort of rant a little bit when it comes to this. And I appreciate all the work that you've done because, again, you know, as Chair Morton said, that the information came, you know, 11 days ago, but that was on a Friday afternoon sort of thing before, and I'm sitting there as usual. This is when they release information and expect us to still meet the deadlines and do public consultation, and it's just very frustrating. But there are some responsive, you know, there are some responsive education program allocations. I had some questions, and I'll you know, there's one there that kind of sticks out that I don't know where it came from, but it was around the cooperative education supports for students with disabilities pilot. I'm not sure where that goes because it's not one that was in the previous funding. But they do tend to move things around. I just think just to make you do a little bit more work, I don't know, because I can't understand why they change, you know, split funds like the ECPP and the CET or whatever it's called. The abbreviations, I'll get them right eventually. Finally, I mentioned core education funding to another trustee and another board, and they go, "What's that again?" So we're still getting used to it. So I will have some questions, but I think most of your presentation highlighted the things that I saw in the technical paper as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what we can. But I know we have a memo later on around the graduation coaches. And again, you know, that is a significant program that we have seen huge, it's a great investment. We've had some great achievement and success with that program. And yet in the budget, again, for some reason it's listed separately in the responsive education program, but we are only receiving, you know, $260,000, which I know we top up as a priority within, and I would like to see that continue if, when we're doing your budget, that it is part of that, because we've seen such a great investment in that. So it's not really a question, but some of the comments that I've read, and I appreciate what you've done, and looking forward to seeing the draft budget, and again, because our benchmarks are not there, and they still haven't addressed some of the other issues that our cost pressures, like the EI and CPP that we have to pay out, because it's basically by law, and we don't get that money from the Ministry of Education. Thank you again for all your work that you've done so far.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards, for those comments. Would anyone like to respond to her comments? Totally up to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick things. In terms of the reductions in funding, when you see a $4 million reduction in funding to support students with language learning needs, it's pretty stark. But I did make a comment during the presentation that we do try and smooth some of those changes over time. And so you certainly won't see a commensurate removal of service in the budget next year to support our students with language learning needs. We understand that ESL and multi-language learners don't correspond with the ministry's 4-year window cycle, and we're committed to supporting all of our students and their success. And so that's sort of what I was referring to when I said we do try and smooth the impact of funding adjustments over time where we're able to. To go back to a previous comment, I talked about temporary accommodation. Just for clarification for everybody, that means portables. And so we bought 80 portables last year for about $11 million. We won't buy nearly that many next year, but that's the funding for that. The Responsive Education Grant, the Cooperative Education Supports for Students with Disabilities pilot, actually shows up in the student readiness section of the Responsive Education Program grant. So if you're looking for a description, but it is what you'd think it is based on the title. It's funding to participating boards to provide targeted supports to students with disabilities to pursue co-op education credits. We'll have to follow up. It seems like we are a pilot board because we are receiving funding under that program, a nominal amount of funding. We'll have to follow up and see how we are participating as part of that pilot program. In terms of your comments on the work that's been undertaken to get us this far, I really appreciate your recognition of that. But it is the individuals that I work closely with here that deserve all the credit. So thank you.
Trustee Kelly Miller.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for this draft and the presentations. I just wanted some clarification, or maybe a question around the qualification experience adjustment as funded through the pupil allocation. I was just wondering if in the board we're seeing any increase in teachers that have additional qualifications and like over the last year, and how if that is going to impact that portion of the funding that is for the pupil allocation. So are we seeing an increase in teachers with multiple additional qualifications, and if that will impact that funding model?
Thanks for the question, Trustee Miller. That's a really difficult question to answer from the perspective of there doesn't seem to be a trend at all. In fact, we had a reach out from the Ministry of Education that says your qualification experience grant from the amount you included in your budget for last year versus the amount that you actually saw for last year is disparate. We go based on what we think we'll see, but we have seen big swings in that funding. So there's no net impact because it's flow-through funding, essentially. We provide the ministry with information to give us the actual funding for teachers, and we flow it through. But it's tough to say. If there's a trend, we support significantly here teachers receiving additional qualifications that help to put them at higher bands on their teaching grid because it's good for them, but it's good for our students if teachers have those additional qualifications, the additional knowledge and expertise. So we'd like to say that there's an upward trend, but the truth is it is all over the map.
Supplemental? And I think we have a trustee with a question over here. Trustee Jackula.
Not a question really. I just want to say thanks for the presentation because you've really simplified it for me. I've been new to this process and trying to follow along every time we've talked about it. So I think this presentation is a great head start for me anyway, and you've simplified things in terms I can understand. So I appreciate it. I just want to say thanks.
And I do have a couple of questions. I'm looking at the transportation, and we all know that we are a growing board. In fact, we're probably experiencing the greatest growth in all of Ontario. So we do have an increase of 2.5% in funding there. But is that going to be adequate to provide the transportation needs for our students?
Adequate's kind of a funny term. I can't say for certainty that funding will cover the cost of providing transportation services for our students for next year. We have been running very close to even with our transportation funding and expenses for the last number of years. I know that trustees have made some decisions around bell times to be as efficient as possible running transportation. I know that Durham Student Transportation Services is judicious in their routing. We have bus drivers that are running 4 routes in the morning and 4 routes in the afternoon to be as efficient as possible. So I'm hopeful because there is limited flexibility within the grants to top up transportation funding if we do see a shortfall. And so we'll be doing our best to make sure that we can operate within that funding while providing service to students based on the standards that trustees have set in the transportation policy.
Trustee Arsenault.
Thank you, and I also want to thank you for this, putting this together. It is an easier read. I do have one question, and I saw that there is a trustee and parent engagement. If you can explain what that is, or where that is?
Just one sec, Trustee Arsenault, please.
Yeah.
So that's actually 2 combined funds. One is the trustee honorary and expense allocation. The other is the allocation for parent engagement. So the trustee component, there is an enrollment component, which is likely the increase you're seeing year over year, but just a minor variance. So that would be 2 separate allocations. Does that clarify what's included in that amount?
Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and I just had one, because I mean, when Chair Morton brought up the conversation around transportation, we have, basically a couple of schools that will be opening up. And I'm already receiving comments about, can we change the bell times? And and again, I just wanted to, because I'm hoping that some people will watch it as far as the impact, as far as bell times. You did slightly mention it about that, bell times really are determined by our transportation or buses, because we do, and I know Ajax in particular, most of their routes are 4-tiered. So if you just sort of comment on the relationship between busing and bell times and costs.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for that. So we operate under the parameters that our schools can have bell times anywhere between 8 o'clock and 9:30. And DSTS has organized, optimized routing based on those parameters. And so you'll see that we have staggered bell times within localized geographic areas to help with optimized transportation. Bell times are one of the few levers that we have to be able to adjust cost and adjust resources. We are limited not just by the amount of funding we receive through the transportation grant, but by the number of bus drivers that we can recruit and retain. We work with a number of operators, very competent, experienced operators that are good employers that have had a very difficult time over the last few years attracting and retaining bus drivers, and it's a similar situation to what we're seeing across the province. So to make best use of the resources we've optimized bell times to make sure that we can provide transportation again within the parameters that trustees have set in their transportation policy. And so they're not ideal for everybody. We totally understand that. But the bell times are what they are to ensure equity of access to education for students that require transportation.
Trustee Arsenault?
There we go. It's okay. It's okay. The finger sometimes doesn't work. Anyways, and I appreciate that summary as far as the transportation is concerned, but I also recognize, our policy, and it's definitely in the technical document as well, when it comes to distances that we calculate for buses, is the 1.6 for elementary and the 3.2 for secondary is basically also part of the funding model that we get. So I know that's always the other question that we get. So relating that together, and that's how funding is part of the transportation funding model, is it's based on that average distance of travel. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Trustee Miller? Did you press it? Press it. No, Trustee Miller? Oh, you didn't have a question? Changed your mind. Okay. I have another question, and it may seem very little, but I'm really curious why the province would change the rural and northern education allocation. Why would that fund be decreased?
The Rural and Northern Education Fund is funded based on some benchmark amounts. There's a demographic benchmark portion, and I'm not sure if it's a socioeconomic benchmark. Sorry, it's a rural density factor. Jen's just reminded me, we did speak about this earlier. I think that the amount has gone down because of the growth that the North is experiencing. So the Rural and Northern Education factor, one of the funding components is density. And so the more heavily populated an area is, the less funding it receives under that grant. And so we are seeing a marginal decrease, likely related to the growth we're seeing in the northern part of our district.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I don't know if I mentioned in my presentation, so I apologize, but this presentation will be available. We'll distribute it via email tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Looking at our agenda, we have a written submission from the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. It is in our package. It's an excellent email received, and I'm wondering if there is anybody who would like to speak to that. And I see Chair Brown, your name is on, you are part of this committee. Would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair Morton. I think the letter is very self-explanatory.
Thank you,
So
Chair.
I don't believe that there's anything else more to add. It's quite detailed.
Yes, we appreciate the information that has come forward, and I know that we will definitely be spending time thinking about that, and Trustee Edwards has already talked about that. Is there any further business? Seeing no other business, I do want to thank Associate Director Wright and his team. I'm looking at his team, so we've got Kristen Talbot, we've got Melissa Durwood sitting back there, we've got Jennifer Machin, and we've got Lisa Bianca, and they've done a lot of work in the last couple of weeks, but their next week is going to be very busy as well. And we look forward to 1 week from tonight hearing more from you. So thank you all for your efforts. Also, thank you to all who have joined us this evening. This has been a very informative meeting, and we are all greatly appreciative of everyone's level of engagement. If there is no other business, I think we'll consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.